Welcome to Biden's America, where you're either going to be locked down in your home or jailed and imprisoned with other people for not being locked down in your home. By the way, welcome to my channel. If you are brand new to my channel, please take the time to smash on that subscription button and hit the little notification bell so you can get notified of my latest content. And don't forget to also smash on that like button, and please comment. I want to hear your thoughts, and also share this video if you agree. Not even a whole 2 weeks after the media called the election for Joe Biden, did all of these states across the country act extremely quick in pushing their authoritative powers and initiate more lockdowns. We're seeing all across the country right now. Chicago, places like Chicago, Vermont, talking about a curfew. You have Philadelphia just enacting their lockdowns today, stating you can only have but so many people in your home, practically trying to cancel Thanksgiving and Christmas for the remainder of the year. And if you do have anyone come to your home, visitors who don't already live there, they have to wear a mask. And while in cities like Philly, they may not be able to literally enforce it, you have in Oregon where the governor is talking about actually enforcing this with police citations and or fines.
What I said was, and I'm very clear about that, is that I have directed our Oregon Superintendent of Police, Terry Davey, to begin working with local law enforcement. I will be issuing an executive order regarding these restrictions, and as before, as always, these are enforceable by law. And I will be asking our Oregon State Police to work collaboratively with local law enforcement to enforce the limits on social gatherings.
Okay, and for that, will people be fined if they're found not listening to your orders?
That's a great question. The question was whether or not people are fined. Law enforcement has the discretion to enforce these. They are Class C misdemeanors, and they can be enforced through a citation, a fine, or through an arrest. Obviously, for the last 8 months, I have been asking Oregonians to follow the letter and the spirit of the law, and we have not chosen to engage law enforcement at this point in time. Unfortunately, we have no other option.
Make that make sense. You're gonna potentially lock someone up for not socially distancing, lock them up in a jail where they really can't social distance, only to potentially have to let them all out anyway because of the spread of COVID-19 in the prison and jail systems. It's insane, but I digress. So you're seeing the governments, the states, overreaching and telling you what you can and cannot do in your own home. We're seeing places like California enter into a stricter lockdown. All the while, Governor Bang Your Wife Newsom is out there partying with his friends and family, all the while telling you what you can and cannot do. And also the state legislatures and or lawmakers of California are making these decisions from the luxury of a nice little private resort in Hawaii, as they talk about locking down the state once again, closing down businesses, gyms, restaurants, places of worship. In New York, they are also talking about closing down the schools. Do we even really need to talk about the mass disenfranchisement that is to middle class and or working class, and I'll even say poor families? And I'm not going to say black and brown as if they're the only ones who are working class and or poor. Black, white, brown, doesn't really matter. All in this. A lot of us are all in the same boat. And what about all of them who are really getting hurt by this because they can't afford the fastest internet service? And so if you have more than one kid in the home trying to distance learn and their system is crashing, or God forbid they have an adult in the, if they even have an adult in the home that can monitor them and to make sure everything's working correctly or that they're paying attention. And for those who were barely paying attention or barely getting it before with in-person learning, this is extremely destructive and for them. Those who also have learning disabilities or have attention deficit disorder may have actually forgotten everything that they've learned over the last year. This has really been a really destructive force on the education of our young people and future generations. Lockdowns are not a plan, but it seems like the far left around the world are just jumping at this chance to lock everything down, seize as much power for themselves. Because you look during the first lockdowns, initially during this pandemic, the billionaires of the world made over $400 billion in the span of 2 to 3 months during the lockdowns. Biggest wealth transfer. Why? Because while the millionaires and billionaires of the world, the big corporations, big markets, did not really suffer much at all. If anything, they gained power because they were allowed to stay open. It was the small mom and pop shops, the stores, the bodegas, the restaurants, the salon owners, barbershops, the small gyms that had to close down shop potentially forever because they could not afford payroll. They could not afford the rent of their property and their space. There was no rent forgiveness whatsoever. And they had to pay rent. Rent was due. They had to close. And a lot of these big businesses and or rich moguls brought up the properties, brought up the businesses for dirt cheap. Millions of people placed on unemployment. And they were now government slaves dependent on the unemployment checks to keep coming in just to sustain themselves. And because they're being told we cannot go to work even if we wanted to. And so they had no other choice. We were witnessing the biggest wealth transfer and transfer of power that we have ever seen. And too many Americans are being conditioned to believe that your rights and your liberties are now considered selfish? Really? This is really a dangerous precedent. And aside from the politicians and those mega corporations taking advantage of this pandemic going around the world by initiating these laws that only benefit the rich and the few while crushing the middle and working class individuals, let's talk about it. Lockdowns are not a plan, because they are not sustainable. Lockdowns are strictly meant to buy time, figure out what's happening, and remember the whole phrase, flatten the curve, don't overwhelm the hospital. We're long past that. Why? Because we never even really hit that curve. New York City, northern New Jersey, okay. No other state came anywhere close to the numbers that were originally being projected that would overwhelm the healthcare system. None. And even in New York City and northern New Jersey, when that naval ship was brought in to help with any, for the foreseeable overflow, there was no overflow. And that naval ship was gone within a matter of days, having treated almost nobody. But this is not a sustainable plan. It cannot happen long term because the economy is not some light switch that you can turn on and off and expect everything to work perfectly well. These are people's livelihoods, people's dreams, people's businesses, people's careers, and sources of income that have been, in some cases, wiped out for good because, again, small businesses that were forced to close their doors forever. Nor does the government, whether it be federal or state, have the funds to support unemployment for any long periods of time to that degree without severely going under and or causing massive inflation. And then let's not also talk about the rising in homicides. Rising in homicides. Why? Because when you have millions of people unemployed, millions of people now put into poverty, no other hope. They feel as though they have no other means but to lash out violently, maybe even steal to get what they need. But let's also talk about the rise in suicides. over 131% increase during the first lockdowns, and you'll only see it again as people start to lose hope and or also start to realize that their home has now become their new prison. You can only take but so much. We've seen a massive increase in alcoholism and substance abuse, domestic abuse, sexual abuse and assault, all during the lockdowns. These are all costs of lockdowns that a lot of people do not want to talk about. And this is going to be Biden's America, because these states and city officials are going to be and or feel emboldened because now they've got the weight of at least the White House backing them, they feel. And this is what a lot of people voted for? No. We really need to start speaking out against this. And the one thing I'm also noticing, they're just talking about cases. Enough with cases. Because when you really look at it, while cases are exploding, they're exploding because testing is increasing. Yes, I'm saying it. There are more cases because you're testing more for it. These aren't individuals that are flooding their doctor's offices and getting tests done, or flooding hospitals. Because even in California, that is just starting their new lockdowns, even them, since the start of this month until November the 16th, they saw a total, even though they'll say, oh my God, we're averaging like 7,000 new cases a day. I did the math and it came out to be over 102,175 total confirmed positives from these testing, but only 4,500 current hospitalizations. 4,500 hospital beds now in use out of 74,000 hospital beds. That's only 6% of the hospital beds available in the state of California that are currently being occupied by COVID, but that's still less than 4% of the total cases. Overwhelming majority of individuals who get this under the age of 60 don't even know they have it. Or let me rephrase this, under the age of 50 don't even know they have it, because they're either asymptomatic, which represents over 90% of those under the age of 50, and or their cases are extremely mild. The hospitalizations, those are either getting hospitalized by this or people in their mid to late 50s, but especially people in their 60s. Those 65 years or older make up over 75% of all deaths and or hospitalizations. This is not a case of virus. Now that we know more about it, we know it does not affect all people equally. Take care of yourself, eat right, exercise, and if you're under the age of 60, this will just be another like coronavirus, much like the cold and or at worst the flu. If you're over 60 and or if you have a pre-existing condition that's already putting a heavy taxation on your body's health and or immune system, you will get the worst of this virus. But this does not require a scorched earth. But I feel as though this pandemic has given those elite, those in power, and or these governments, those that lean left, the right and or excuse to do this big reset on the world, and it's destroying lives. And we'll never recover from it unless we continue to fight back, get educated on what's happening. Don't allow the propaganda to be pushed, because I am going to say propaganda, because whatever narrative that those in government want to push, and they'll say we're following the science. And yes, they'll have people like Dr. Fauci, for instance, speak. But the moment another physician like Dr. Simone Gold and Dr. Erickson and the frontline doctors of America speak out against the narrative, they ban those doctors, despite saying, listen to the scientists, listen to the medical experts. There is no consensus on this, but they make you think there is, because the only ones allowed to have a conversation and or speak about this and provide their facts and their studies are those that are in line with the government. And any doctor or scientist that goes outside of that or outside what the World Health Organization says, despite the fact that they've been so wrong on this from the beginning, at one point saying that there was no person-to-person contact back in January, or that travel bans were somehow racist and not necessary back on February the 1st. And yet somehow they're the gold standard. And so long as everything falls in line with what the government is saying and the World Health Organization, the media is complicit, and then banning any alternative information. And though while ignorance is a choice, it's still a choice, but they're doing their damnedest to make sure it's not a choice because they're censoring anything. And that's why I say it's propaganda, because there's this big collusion. You're not allowed to have certain opinions without them either flagging your account and or banning the information from being disseminated. And that's why I say propaganda, in order to help prop up this great reset. And we need to fight against it and stand up for our rights, know what's going on, and also pressure these politicians to let them know, hey, we will do a recall election, vote of incompetence, and or we will make sure we definitely vote you out next election if you try to initiate another lockdown, because we really cannot take it. We cannot take it financially. We cannot take it in terms of our kids' education and being set back a whole another year. We cannot take it psychologically, the mental conditions, all of the failed relationships and their marriages that happened during the lockdown. We were not built to be like this, but you have forces, again, trying to do this great big reset, and they're using this as an excuse to really destroy you, condition our minds, break us, because if you can put someone to the breaking point psychologically too, they'll believe anything. So that's my video. I'm just very alarmed with what I'm seeing, this rush to lockdown as soon as they projected Joe Biden to be the winner. That seems to be where this country is headed towards. You'll either be locked down in your home or locked down in jail for not complying with the lockdown restrictions. And it's just a very dangerous precedent and or method and the path in which we seem to be headed. That's my thoughts. I want to know your thoughts. Please like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and don't forget to subscribe. This is Bruce the Boss Brooks, and I'm out.